My first question when I learned of Framework's first desktop computer was, why is there a desktop computer? Framework has built multiple generations of laptops for those who wanted the configurability of a desktop computer, but in a laptop form factor. How could Framework compete against your ability to build a desktop with your choice of CPU, cooler, power supply, memory, storage, and more? Their answer is, well, it can't. But the Framework desktop is the IKEA of desktop PCs. If you can put together a bookshelf, this PC will be child's play. Now this is a surprisingly interesting product. At just 4.5 liters in volume, the Framework desktop is a bit larger than a small form factor PC like a Nook, and about double the size of the mini PCs coming to market. But what's inside it is just as intriguing. AMD's Strix Halo, the Ryzen AI Max Plus 395 processor. People are starting to refer to these as AI workstations. But the point is that you can do a lot with this machine, and with a 55-watt TDP with not a whole lot of power either. In fact, if you're looking for a catch or something wrong with the Framework desktop, there's really just one. As we've told you before, the memory comes soldered down and is not upgradable. Otherwise, Framework sent us a build-it-yourself DIY version of the Framework desktop, and, well, there's not that much to D. But there's a lot of thought and detail that Framework has built into the desktop as well as the assembly process, and honestly, it's a genuine pleasure to use. I will say that this is an embargoed review. By the time you're seeing this, we should have the full review on PCWorld.com. But I've done enough already to give you a very good sense for how this desktop works and how it performs, but there are just a few things left that I want to test that you'll see on PCWorld.com. So let's set this up. What's inside, what you'll have to do as part of the DIY process, and most importantly, how much it will cost. We simply asked Framework to send us an example desktop, leaving us to do the math. Add $2,000 for the CPU, GPU, and memory, about $200 for 2 terabytes of storage, an additional $200 for a Windows Pro license, about $25 for the CPU fan, $5 for the power cable, $40 for the side panel, and $45 for the tiles you see on the front. That's about $2,515 all told. Remember, that's an AI Max Plus 395 with 16 cores and 32 threads, 128 gigabytes of LPDDR5X memory, and an integrated GPU capable of 40 CUs at 2.9 gigahertz. Right, so let's talk about the process. Framework sends all this to you in what's essentially a flat packed box, and then asks you to scan a barcode for a list of instructions. There's no secret to it. You can scan it yourself and follow along right here. You know how IKEA assembles everything with an Allen wrench? Framework provides a two-headed screwdriver, one with a Torx screw and a Phillips screwdriver on the other side. There's really not much to it. The CPU and memory are already mounted to the main board, which is already inside the case. All you have to do as part of the DIY edition is install the SSD and heat spreader, screw down the fan and plug in the cable, and assemble the case. The most time-intensive part of the whole thing is actually installing Windows. What I'm going to do is take some of this apart so you can see the insides, and then we'll box it all up and then talk about performance. So now let's take a look at what the Framework desktop actually has inside of it. But for right now, let's go ahead and just sort of take this apart. Again, there's not that much to assemble, so by disassembling it, you can actually see what there is to do. It's held together by thumb screws on the top. This isn't exactly a toolless case because we have the little screwdriver with the Torx screw and the Phillips screw, which we'll show in a second. You can take this off. The top sort of is clipped in, and you can go ahead and remove that. You can see that there is going to be some sort of a process where you can remove the main board and upgrade it in the future. Well, obviously, we have a single generation right now. You've seen instructions right here to unscrew the screw, which I assume to be right there. And then conceivably, I haven't done this myself, this whole thing should be able to slide out. Now, the other parts of this are to install the side panel. You get a choice of either this clear plastic side panel, or you can get straight metal black. It has the venting appears in both, and the only thing you really has to do is to screw in the fan with the with these Phillips. I have it set to the Torx, but you screw it in with the Phillips screwdriver and then plug the power connector into the motherboard right now. Again, it's all clearly labeled. There's pictures describing everything that you need to do and so forth. The only thing that I would consider to be a little bit nerve-wracking is the installation of the SSD. That heat spreader pops up at an angle. That SSD screw can be removed. For me, that tiny little Torx screw got lost a time or two actually in the case, so I had to kind of, ease it on out and put it back in. Again, you can see the insides of it. Cables are managed. Everything's wrapped together. There's everything's connected. You don't really have to do any of that. Again, the only thing you have to do is connect the fan and the SSD. There is room for a second SSD if you want. There's a second M.2 slot over here. Let's see if I can get this thing off. There we go. Again, these slide into, these are sort of, they have little tabs that connect here. The other thing to note here, again, if you're confused as to which way it's aligned, there's lots of little hints, top and bottom here. That's kind of consistent across all of these different components here, so you know exactly what to do in case, for example, you just get stuck. Again, this is empty. And came empty. We could go ahead and take off the SSD's heat spreader to go ahead and add an additional SSD. In this case, we didn't. We asked for 2 terabytes of storage. That's what it came with. You do have options, either anything from 500 gigabytes, which is $69, to 8 terabytes, which is $699. Generally speaking, all of these use the WD Black, Western Digital Black SSDs. You do have a choice between the SN7100 and the slightly faster SN850X. Now, the other thing that Framework is kind of known for are its configurability options, both aesthetic as well as functional. This is something that is kind of fun. So Framework allows you to buy a number of tiles, and these tiles pop out, and they actually have slits in them to allow airflow, if you want to zoom in on that. There are a couple of opaque tiles that you can buy as well. For example, on this one, we actually were asked to send in our logo, so we have a little PC World tile here, but they also have tiles you can buy with the AMD logo and the Framework logo as well. Those tiles are generally, I believe they're $11 for 7. These are a little bit more expensive. They get up in the $20 range. You'll need, I think it's 21 of these to complete the arrangement. You don't actually have to have the tiles. In fact, if you'll notice, airflow comes out of this, and this PC World tile is completely opaque. So technically, I'm blocking a little bit of the airflow. The other interesting thing is that you've seen on the laptops too are these modular expansion ports. These feed into the machine as a USB-C 10 gigabit connection, but you can go ahead and order whatever you would like as far as expansion is concerned. There's USB-C, USB-A, there's Ethernet, there's an audio jack. To remove these, there's a little switch down here at the bottom, and they're locked in right now, but you can flip that switch, remove it, and replace it with something else. I use it to basically put my mouse and keyboard in, and that's that as far as those are concerned. On the back, you have a pretty standard arrangement of I/O, HDMI, a couple of USB-C ports. These are actually USB 4. If you're not an I/O nerd, USB 4 and Thunderbolt are essentially the same. In this case, this would be a Thunderbolt 4 port if it was an Intel processor. Intel doesn't actually certify things that aren't made by it. So again, this is the generic USB 4. This is not USB 4 version 2, the 80/120 gigabit version. This is just straight old 40 gigabit USB-C / Thunderbolt. You can use either a Thunderbolt dock or a USB dock. It'll work just fine. A couple of DisplayPort connections, a couple of USB-A, gigabit Ethernet, and a power cord, which you can buy for various locales and configurations, UK, US, and so forth. Next, we'll talk about performance. So let's talk a little bit about what the Framework Desktop can do. And before we do that, I have to add a little bit of a preamble because Framework shipped us with beta drivers. And these beta drivers work just fine out of the box. But I've included, in these performance graphs, I've included an additional driver that AMD actually sent us. The interesting thing about AMD laptops in general is that with an Intel laptop, it takes half the available memory and assigns it to the video RAM. And it takes the other half and assigns it to the operating system. With AMD, it's actually configurable. It'll do it itself, but you can go ahead and specify how much VRAM you want. And in this case, the AMD driver allowed us to take up to 96 gigabytes of the available memory and assign it to VRAM. So why is that important? Well, for AI, and this is essentially what this is, an AI workstation, VRAM is essentially RAM. If you're running an AI algorithm, a chatbot, an image generator, the more memory, the better. So you're essentially going to see in some of these benchmarks that we're going to show on the screen, some additional performance that additional driver gets you. And that's going to be part of the Adrenalin software package that AMD provides. Again, it's sort of in a beta state right now, but it'll eventually be part of the Adrenalin package and really will be most useful for the 395 Plus that's inside of this, but you'll probably see some benefits for the other Strix-Halo processors as well. So for comparison's sake, we took a look at obviously the Framework Desktop, but we compared it against some additional products, mainly in the mobile space. This is actually a sort of a mobile processor that's being used at a desktop. It has 55 watts TDP. You're going to have some additional cooling that's going to boost the performance. But we've seen this in the first one we saw was the Asus ROG Flow Z13, which was a gaming tablet. The HP ZBook Ultra G1A is a full-fledged standardized clamshell. Again, HP pitches it as a workstation, but that's more of a standardized form factor, so it's going to be the closest in comparison to the Framework Desktop in terms of performance. We also took the Asus ZenBook S16, which is a high-end Ryzen AI 300 part. Again, not specific to AI, but with some basic AI capabilities. So we're just going to sort of whip through these fairly quickly. The first one we look at is Cinebench 2024. Again, if you look at the blue numbers, that's the single-threaded performance. It's pretty much the same, straight down the line, and that's to be expected. You are seeing some differences with the Framework Desktop. Again, with the additional cooling in this the additional cooling makes a difference here. That's going to negatively impact the Asus and the HP laptops as well. 3D Mark is the benchmark that we use for evaluating 3D performance, and again, you're seeing increased performance with the Framework Desktop and the Framework Desktop with the AMD driver on top of it. Again, similar to Cinebench, you're getting more performance probably because of better cooling. Now, the interesting thing was that was when I first started testing this with the ProCyan benchmarks. ProCyan is one of the few benchmarks that provides a standardized result for AI, and they have a number of tests. I choose the AI image generator as well as the text generator, which is essentially a chatbot. In this case, I was a little bit shocked to see the Framework Desktop when I originally tested it coming under the ROG Flow and the ZBook Ultra, again with a score of 576 compared to 644 or 712. But again, you reassign the VRAM with the beta driver, and you see the performance kick up significantly. So again, this is one of the advantages that an AMD processor has, and it's one of the things that people don't necessarily talk about, but in this standpoint, it makes a significant difference. By the way, the image generation was about, for a 512 by 512 image, it was about 10 seconds per image. So, again, if you're actually using this for an AI image generator, that's about the performance you'll get. We didn't have availability for all of these to run the ProCyan AI text generation benchmark. That takes some low-end AI chatbot models and asks them a series of questions just to see how quickly they respond and how good the performance is. We only compared this really to the HP ZBook, and the performance here, again, you're getting the edge on the Framework desktop, and especially with the beta driver, but the ZBook and the Framework desktop come in roughly the same. We conclude with Blender 4.0, which is just a generic application, but again, you can see that like the others, Framework desktop outperformed the others. And then we also have a couple of games. Again, the additional VRAM here and the additional cooling really help it in terms of looking at both Cyberpunk 2077 as well as the next one, Call of Duty Black Ops. The thing to point out here is that for both of those games, you're getting minimum scores of at least 60 frames a second, which we consider to be sort of the minimum for quality gameplay. You're also getting 80 to 99 on Cyberpunk, as well as 136 to 140 on the Framework desktop. It's important to point out where they're not using upscaling, we're not using frame generation. These are sort of farm-to-table frames, so to speak. Really, what you'll get without the benefits of this these additional sort of what some call fake frames technologies. The other thing we wanted to do is to compare the Framework desktop against what you might already be familiar with in terms of additional laptops. In this case, what we would normally do is we would pick out a specific category, maybe price or the display size or the processor, and simply try to tell you which is better than the others. For this, what I wanted to do was simply sort of fix in your mind what the performance of the Framework desktop as well as the Strix Halo processor is inside of it by comparing it to notebooks and components that you might already be familiar with. So that's what we're going to do here. Again, you'll see more of a full-fledged comparison over on PCWorld.com, but we'll sort of highlight a couple of specific examples here. We start out again with the Cinebench benchmark. Basically, this is just a CPU-centric benchmark. It's running all of the cores as fast as it can. I stuck with that multi-core benchmark. Here, really, you're seeing the Core Ultra 9 285HX. That's the Arrow Lake processor. Overcome everything. There's really, in this case too, I use the I use the new AMD driver to sort of give it the best comparison. But if you're looking at the Framework desktop compared to a traditional gaming notebook, it holds up very well, at least from a CPU standpoint. Again, you've got the 275HX, another Arrow Lake processor beneath it, the Razer Blade 14, which uses the Ryzen AI 9 365, and then a couple of additional Intel laptops below it, the Alienware 16 Aurora, which goes back to sort of the Raptor Lake refresh, and then the Dell G15, which goes all the way back to a 13th generation processor. Again, not too shabby in terms of performance. I didn't bother looking at some of the other benchmarks we use, including Handbrake. I just pulled out a couple of games. Here you're seeing the Framework desktop appear at the bottom of these rankings. That's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. Again, look at the components that we're talking about here. In Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is being run at 1080p on the highest graphical settings, we're looking at comparable to a little bit below a 240H RTX 5060, 13650HX RTX 4060. I think it's probably helpful for you to think of this as just this is essentially a 4060 running inside of an older CPU. We see the same thing from Metro Exodus, running at 1080p as well as its highest extreme settings. Again, floating around that area at the bottom with a 4060 and the Core i7 13650HX. For Metro Exodus, you're not really seeing playable frame rates at 42 frames per second, but for Shadow of the Tomb Raider, you absolutely are. So, this isn't something that can give you necessarily top-of-the-line performance of today's AAA games, but again, too, we've also turned off frame generation and upscaling for this, too, so if you can fiddle around with it, you might actually get over 60 frames per second, depending upon what you do. What do I think of the Framework desktop? I liked it. I liked it a lot. The detail that Framework devotes to, frankly, every aspect of the process, well, I wouldn't say it's refreshing, but it's certainly welcome. You'll never feel over your head. This is simply one of the most well-documented, if not well-designed computers I've ever used, and it was an absolute pleasure to review. It's your choice, of course, whether an AI workstation is what you're looking for. Otherwise, though, you're in good hands with Framework. For more reviews, podcasts, and other features, stay tuned to PC World's YouTube channel right here. And don't forget to check out the full review of the Framework desktop on PCWorld.com.